that is? Yeah, it's coming. My daughter is deeply into jump rope right now. So you should see. I come home every night. Daddy, can you see what I can do? Can you jump rope like this? You know, she does these switches back and forth, and it makes me so glad to know that 6-year-old kids, little girls, are still jumping rope in the spring, and the boys are still matching marbles and doing odds and evens and all that. That's E.E. Cummings. And another Cummings poem about spring. Oh, sweet, spontaneous earth. How often have the doting fingers of prurient philosophers pinched and poked thee? Has the naughty thumb of science prodded thy beauty? How often have religions taken thee upon their scraggy knees, squeezing and buffeting thee that thou mightest conceive gods? But true to the incomparable couch and death, thy rhythmic lover, thou answerest them only with we try to manage it ourselves, he says, but who knows? Well, that's some poems on spring. Get us going. Do you like poems on spring? I even took out the Ode to the West Wind here, thinking we want to hear some Shelley, but maybe not today. But you know, if winter comes, yeah, okay. There are 2 poems by Emerson I'd like to start with before we go to prose. And these are poems I don't think I did last fall, particularly because they didn't fit in the scheme of things as I planned the sequence of what I wanted to say to you. But I thought, wow, this is the time to start, because they are essentially answers, retorts, and they have some important lines in them as well, Emerson lines. On the one hand, Emerson found himself facing this kind of response. If you are so sensitive to the world around you, and to the presence of God in the world around you, why aren't you a minister? He quit, as you know. He wasn't a Unitarian minister who quit because he couldn't take the restrictions of orthodoxy, even as orthodox as the Unitarians were too orthodox for him. And he wrote a poem in which he said why he couldn't be a priest, in essence. He also had the same kind of response in terms of the major political movement of the time, which is, here you are with your sensitivities, and you're a man who opposes slavery. Why aren't you out running for office? Why aren't you doing political things in this day of anti-slavery activities and ultimately the war? In other words, Emerson found he had to defend himself from the man he was. I sympathize with this because I remember myself in the Vietnamese War feeling that this war was radically unjust and wrong, but knowing very well that I simply am not the kind of man to carry a placard and walk down the street. And my students at Wisconsin, which was one of the hotbeds of activity, were busy bombing buildings, literally, at the time. And they used to ask me this: why aren't you out there if you don't think this war is right? Which I didn't think it was. I was out there passing a petition around to get McCarthy on the ballot. But that was as far as my activism was taken. I wanted to work within the system. I didn't approve of it, but I felt I was not the kind of man who could demonstrate the way, even in my youth. Maybe now I could, but back then I couldn't. And so when I would teach Emerson, I would feel this very strongly. Emerson's answer is, I'm different from what you want a person to be. I'm myself. And he wrote 2 poems dealing with this. One, the religious, really, why aren't you a priest since you're so sensitive? And the other one, why aren't you out there leading the anti-slavery movement? I thought we should start today by looking at these poems. So if you have your text, turn to 417, the poem The Problem, which is these are both poems I like a lot. We just didn't get to them last year. This is our chance. These are classic Emerson lines. They don't rhyme the way you might. They're his sort of nutty, weird little verse where words move into each other in oddly strange fashions. The opening stanza is a statement of, I will never become a priest. Orthodoxy is not mine. I like a church. I like a cowl. You know what a cowl is? What is it? It's what the monk wears, right? Yeah. His first line is, I'm really for all these antique, wonderful things, like church buildings and the monk's robes. And I see the priest at my school where I teach. As you know, Eastside Catholic, and they put on for liturgies, and they were wonderful. But the fact is, I'm still a Presbyterian, even though I rather enjoy watching the Romans do their things. I like a church. I like a cowl. I love a prophet of the soul. And on my heart monastic aisles fall like sweet spray on pensive smiles. Yet not for all his faith can see would I that cowled churchman lead. You would feel, I'm sure, very strongly, if you are, why aren't you? Some of us right here have had to defend ourselves. I choose ultimately not to be a priest, in essence. I don't despise the priesthood, but that's not me. And Emerson has to defend himself against that. And so the poem starts right out. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a church, nothing wrong with a cowl. I love to walk into a church and hear the monastic aisles. You can almost hear the priests singing their chants. But that's not me. Why should the vest on him allure, which I could not on me endure? Classic statement.
I just have a tremendous example of that. Myself and several friends were asked to teachers to minister to their church. We would trade in these vestments and sit up by the altar, and we always that's just bothered us and our children. And finally we were asked, we were living this way. This would be a great honor, and it is. And I had the hardest time writing a letter explaining how I felt.
I think it's great.
And it wasn't that I was denying.
One of my favorite people at Eastside is a priest who's one of my best friends. He also teaches American Lit. And Father is a man who, I think in essence yearns to wear the collar. He really likes wearing it. But most of our clerics at Eastside don't dress up. Only one of our nuns wears the veil, and it's very abbreviated. The others wear bright pink. So, as he's been at Eastside since this time, he gradually has weaned himself from it. So he wore, I remember the first day he wore a gray shirt instead of, and then an ordinary sports shirt. But then a week later he'd put on the whole thing all the way up to the top, and we'd make fun of it. And there's an interesting, I think for me, sort of poignancy, because I would find it very uncomfortable to wear a sign of my occupation all the time. But I know that he is essentially a conservative man who not only admires and respects the symbol of his priesthood, but who likes it. So here's it. Others on the faculty who are former clerics despise it. We have priests who are former priests, and nuns who are former nuns, and who wouldn't be thought dead wearing clerical garb. But Jeff wants to wear it. And so right away, Emerson picks up, I think, a lot of reality when you wear it. What's comfortable on you. The difference is the difference of the attraction. I'm perfectly comfortable with him wearing it, except when we're in a bar together. The chicks don't come around, when you're with them. That was a joke, ladies. Why should the vest on him allure which I could not on me endure? Not from a vain or shallow thought is awful Jove young Phidias wrought. There's the image of course, the great Greek artist, who, in this case, a sculptor. So the great artist didn't create his art, his statue of Jove, from shallowness or from egotism, vanity. Never from lips of cunning fell the thrilling Delphic oracle. You notice here he's referring to classical Greek tradition. The Greek oracle, of Delphi, was the greatest of oracles. And his point is, an oracle doesn't give its oracality through cunningness, through contrivance. It's a connection with truth. In other words, you can already get what Emerson's going to say, the relation between artist and truth and priest and truth is somewhat different, but equally valid in many ways. Out from the heart of nature rolled the burdens of the Bible old. The litanies of nations came like the volcano's tongue of flame up from the burning core below. The canticles of love rolled. The hand that rounded Peter's dome and groined the isles of Christian Rome wrought in a sad sincerity. Himself from God could not free. He builded better than he knew. The conscious stone to beauty grew. Wonderful passage, especially for Catholics. Here you have the great church of Christendom, Emerson says. But he's talking about the architect. Michelangelo, who created St. Peter's. I suspect most of you know this. You don't have to be a Catholic to appreciate the glory of that building, do you? But that building, Emerson says, was not built by priests. It was built by an artist. And that God spoke through Michelangelo, who was, by the way, not the purest of men. But Emerson's point is that God speaks through art. And Emerson didn't know, pardon me, that Michelangelo did not know that he was being God's instrument when he drew the plans for this great church. His argument is going to be that God speaks through other professions than priesthood. And that Michelangelo is in fact one of the ways God speaks to us. He builded better than he knew. He just thought he was building a church, but he was building greatness, access to God's Spirit. And he goes on and gives us some natural examples here. Knowest thou what wove yon woodbird's nest of leaves and feathers of her breast? Or how the fish outbuilt her shell, painting with morn each annual cell? Or how the sacred pine tree adds to her old leaves new myriads? Such and so grew holy piles, whilst love and terror laid the tiles. Piles here means that such and so grew holy piles. He just means churches. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe, for example. He says it may easily be that what produced Chartres, who named the great cathedrals, Notre Dame, was love and terror. Love for the work, but maybe fear of the overseer. Right? I mean, maybe your supervisor terrified you so much that when you built the gargoyles in Notre Dame, you did it because you knew he'd give you a fist in the face if you didn't. But his point is that the bird that builds its nest out of its own feathers is doing it for its own reasons, but that God's presence is involved here as well. Emerson, who does not believe in a traditional Christian God, does believe very strongly in the immanence of God in the world. And he says that the cathedrals are built the same way. All these wonderful piles. I love the word. It's an old word. For me, it still has strong images of a pile of something, but in his day, it just meant structure, creative structure. And so he looks at the next line, right? In effect, what he's doing is pushing it to the Christians, whereas we can do reading. Do you like the Parthenon? Is there a person in the world who doesn't think this is one of the most beautiful structures? It wasn't created by Christianity; it was created by pagans. But Emerson's point is the Spirit of God was in the people who made that building. That is, you can get closer to God by seeing the glory of Greece, not Orthodox, as you can see. Earth proudly wears the Parthenon as the best gem on her zone. And morning opes with haste her lids to gaze upon the pyramids. Not only the Greeks, but go even further. If we have a little sentimental affection for the Greek gods, we don't have any at all for the Egyptian gods. But Emerson's point, the people who built the pyramids, nature every morning hurried to see the sight of the pyramids on the desert. Or England's abbeys bends the sky as on its friends with kindred eye. The technique of this is very simple. You see, he sets up the Parthenons, the pyramids, England's abbeys. The abbeys are Christian. But the structure of the poem says the Parthenon is equal to the pyramids, is equal to the abbeys. And none of those are any closer to God in their creation. They may be in terms of the worship that takes place within them. But God's presence is here in all of these great creations. To gaze upon the pyramids, or England's abbeys bends the sky as on its friends with kindred eye. For out of thought's interior sphere, these wonders rove the upper air. And nature gladly gave them place, adopted them into her race, and granted them an equal date with Andes and with Ararat. In other words, he says the greatest creations of art, of human beings, are equal in nature. She backs up and says, join me. I create the Andes or Mount Ararat, which is an Old Testament. Is that where Noah went with the ark? Yeah. But the equal to that in our wonder and our awe should be the Parthenon. These temples grew as grows the grass. Art might obey, but not surpass. The passive master lent his hand to the vast soul that o'er him planned. You have to always watch these words when you're reading them because they have this sort of peculiar 19th century meaning. Passive here means that the artist who created the structure opened himself up to creation, to God. It means relaxing, as opposed to the aggressive, I will impose my human ego on it. It means that Michelangelo, when he created St. Peter, said, in essence, but not in so many words, God guide my hand. So it's the human being, the conduit of creation, as opposed to forcing his will on it. To the vast soul that o'er him planned. And the same power that reared the shrine bestrode the tribes that knelt within. Even the fiery Pentecost girds with one flame, a countless host. Trances the heart through chanting choirs, and through the priest the mind inspires. The word unto the prophet spoken was writ on tables yet unbroken. The word by seers, sibyls told in groves of oak, or fanes of gold, still floats upon the morning wind, still whispers to the good mind. Now, your response to this, I'm sure, is related to how tightly clasped you are to your own religion. In the sense that you are highly orthodox Protestant or Catholic, you would find something offensive here, I think. I don't think many of the people I work with in Catholic school would find this offensive at all, by the way, very few. But Emerson's point is that God speaks through all of these. He sets equivalents. God speaks through the prophets. He speaks through the sibyls. He speaks through the access to the universe. And there is, by the way, support for this in the Bible if you read it. And St. Paul refers to it frequently, that God judges the pagans on their hearts. He has access to them as well. So it's an interesting way of approaching it. And he says, of course, that it's still here, because for Emerson, the age of miracles was not 2,000 years ago. God's miracle here is like, as Whitman says, in every mouse. Remember the line from Song of Myself? A mouse is enough to stagger 6 billion of infidels. 6 billions of infidels, if you look at it right. Though I have a mouse in the basement, I'm trying to... I don't feel quite so favorable towards that particular mouse, but the mouse in the abstract is wonderful, yes. One accent of the Holy Ghost, the heedless world never will. That if the Ghost spoke, the Holy Ghost has never disappeared. Every accent, every tone is still here in the world around us. I know what say the fathers wise. The book itself before me lies. Old Chrysostom. He's talking about the old church fathers, right? Old Chrysostom, best Augustine, and he who blent both in his line the younger golden lips or minds. Taylor, Shakespeare of divines. These are just names of famous theologians. I know what all the great theologians in the church have said. His words are music in my ear. I see his cowled portrait dear, and yet, for all his faith could see, I would not the good bishop be. Emerson, in other words, is saying, I don't want to narrow myself down to particular orthodoxy. That's just not the kind of man I am. I like the poem. I think it's an interesting statement. Though it's one that we all have to come to terms with on our own, in terms of our own relationship to God, and our concept of what the church might be. But he had a bigger problem. Any questions about that? Sort of hailing us through these poems. An even more interesting poem in some ways because of its immediate political necessity is the one on page 439. So if you have, this is the ode to W.C. Channing, W.H. Channing, William Henry Channing. This poem is a response to a lecture given by one of the Channings. It's a nephew of the great Channing, William Ellery Channing, I think. The Channings were very active abolitionists. And Emerson went to a lecture and heard Channing argue that no man of substance or self-respect could possibly not be actively involved in abolition. Well, Emerson was in favor of abolition, but he was not the kind of man to go out on the street. He wasn't, who was the great newspaper editor who stood in the doorway? Starts with G. Garrison, yes. He wasn't a Garrison by any means. And he wasn't even a John Greenleaf Whittier, who occupied most of his adult professional life agitating. So here Emerson found himself with a moral dilemma. Sensitivity to the issue, but really incapacity to be the kind of public man that Channing wanted. And he wrote this really interesting poem. I think it fits so well in many ways to our own century that it's stunningly appropriate, given the fact that it's an occasional poem written out of a particular political problem from the mid-19th century. It starts out just like the other one with a statement. Though loath to grieve the evil times, so patriot, I cannot leave my honeyed thought for the priest's cant or statesman's rant. I'm not going to say this is a good poem. I'm going to say it's an interesting poem. The opening two lines, I am sorry, Channing, to grieve you. In this bad time, you are the great patriot. I'm loath to do it. But even though it hurts me to say no thank you to your lecture, I cannot leave my honeyed thought. Now here you're back with the privacy and the ivory tower, right? The sweetness of my own interior, to become, as he says, a priest. And you notice the language he uses. The priest cant or statesman's rant. Right, cant is the argot, the word of priests, the liturgical repetition, which is totally unappealing to him as a person. And as far as statesmen go, politicians, they're just ranting as far as he's concerned. He says, even though I agree with you, I can't become one of these two people. If I refuse my study for their politic, which at the best is a trick, the angry muse puts confusion in my brain. He says, when I try, if I refuse to go to my study and think and write, which is my job, my job is to put words on paper for people to read. And I try to become political. He says, and the point is, at the very best, a political statement is, he says, at the best is trick. It's all it is. Yeah, you can imagine. Emerson's very good at picking up words that are shallow. And you and I know this, right? We've all gone through, you listen to one politician after another politician, and you know that the words are simply adaptations of the people in front of them, and their obedience or allegiance to an issue depends upon who they're around. And Emerson said, I just can't become this kind of person, and if I try, what happens to me? This is, right? The muse, the muse is the spirit of inspiration. It just puts a fog in my head as soon as I try to be one of them. But who is he that prates of the culture of mankind, of better arts and life? Go, blind worm, go. Behold the famous states harrying Mexico with rifle, with knife. Emerson never was afraid to look at reality. And so he looked, in a sense, this stanza is looking at himself. Right? He says, who in these days stands up and talks, he uses the word praise, which is a wonderful shallow word again, who talks about culture. How can you stand up in front of America and say, now let us take time to look at Michelangelo? Go doing it, talk to Michelangelo, back and forth. He says here, this is 1848, can I stand in a place like this and talk about culture? Emerson says, when the United States has its armed forces harrying Mexico with rifle and knife. It's a crucial problem. How can I stand here and talk about higher things when we as a nation are, and if you know anything about history, are in effect going through a 19th century version of the Vietnamese War. The Mexican-American War is very similar in its effect on this country to what happened to this country in the Vietnamese War. That is the kind of divisiveness. Most Northerners saw the Mexican-American War as a cruel and crass and shallow attempt to add slave states to the nation. And almost all of our great 19th century writers were opposed to it on those grounds. The most famous poem came out of it by James Russell Lowell. Does anybody know what poem it is? A poem called The Bigelow Papers, which was a dialect attack by a sort of ordinary young fellow in New England who refuses to join the army to go down there and expand these slave states. As for war, I call it murder. There's my testament, plain and flat. Right? He's the one who says, if you take a sword and draw it, and you stick a feller through, the government ain't to answer for it. God will send the bill to you. Right? It's a very funny and very effective anti-war poem from 1848. And Lowell, as you know, is one of the great conservative men of the 19th century. But Emerson's in the same boat. The country is confused. Right. This is the time when Thoreau refused to pay his tax and went to jail because he wouldn't allow a portion of his taxes to go to support this war. So you read this poem in that context. Emerson says, how can I do this? Or who, with accent bolder, dare praise the freedom-loving mountaineer? I found thee, O rushing Cook, and in thy valleys, Cook, the jackals of the Negro holder. See, Emerson's a man who does believe so much and so good. He says, how can I praise the free man of the West? Here he's thinking, especially in Kentucky, Daniel Boone, right? Daniel Boone killed a bar here. Our great myths. He says, I try to speak about what it is that makes America great, and when I go to find Daniel Boone and his bar, or you name it, the Alamo, I turn around and what do I see in this land? Slaves. It's almost impossible, in other words, to be a simple, patriotic American before the Civil War. The presence of slavery, because Emerson was very much opposed to it. Let's look up a little bit to our own New England. The God who made New Hampshire haunted the lofty land. Small back and wind, house and yoke. If earth fire cleave the upheaved land and bury the folk, the southern crocodile would grieve. Virtue palters, right is hence, freedom praised but hid, funeral eloquence rattled the coffin lid. Stunning lines in many ways. You see. Who would cry if New Hampshire went to perdition? Southern crocodile. But what do we know about crocodile tears? Right? This is before the Civil War. It's about 10 years before. If New Hampshire was destroyed, he says, if earth fire cleave the upheaved land and bury the folk, if all of New England and what it stood for went to blazes in a volcano, the states of Virginia and Georgia would send their condolences and say, oh, weep, right? And they would say inside their hearts, good riddance. Right? Enough of that. He's very aware of this. And he says in these days, virtue falters. Where is right? Over there next door. Right? Freedom is praised, but hid. What boots thy zeal? Of what use is it? What good is it to be so zealous? O glowing friend, that would indignant rend the Northland from the South. Wherefore? To what end? Boston Bay and Bunker Hill would serve things still. Things are of the snake. You should, if you were listening now, you'd be getting around to his argument for one of his arguments for not doing anything. The North is really no better. New England is filled with paltry people, little tiny men. We're not standing up anyway. If you separated the Northland from the South, Boston Bay and Bunker Hill would still be living their crass, materialistic lives. Emerson is so often above and beyond the particulars. He doesn't really believe that the North is any better than the South. It takes a lot of the impulse. If you have a strong, almost religious belief in the virtue of the North, then you can stand up and fight and kill. But Emerson doesn't believe that the North is so much better that it has the right to go down and kill the Southerners. All the Southerners have is a more discreet evil to attack, don't they? Slavery is so nice to be opposed to it. But while you're out there opposing slavery, maybe you're oppressing people in your factory in Lowell, Massachusetts. More likely, in fact. And so his image, this very famous stanza, his image of mid-19th century, the horseman serves his horse. The neat herd serves the neat. The merchant serves the purse. The eater serves his eat. 'Tis the day of the chattel, the web to weave and corn to grind. Things are in the saddle, ride mankind. This is the 20th century lament, right? The age of materialism, but this is Emerson's stanza about that. The horseman survives to do what? Keep his horse fed. Yeah. The eater serves his meat. Emerson says everything is inside out. This is 1850. We're just beginning the Industrial Revolution. He says, unlike, if you remember last fall, where Emerson says the way you remember what it is to be a human being is to focus closely on the essential value of yourself. Be a man farming, not a farmer. Okay? Don't be a tool. Don't be a profession or an occupation. Your occupation is an attachment to your essential value, which we have in common. That's what's always claimed. But he looks at America in 1850 and says, things are in the saddle. Instead of us riding our tools, our machinery, we ride them. If you remember Walden, that's Thoreau's great point. I am ruled by my land. I went to Walden to find out how much I had to have. I put in so many rows of beans. It turned out I only needed half as many. So I improved my life by putting in half as many rows of beans the next year. I didn't have to work so hard to keep beans coming up. But if you plant the beans, then you have to water the beans, then you have to hoe the beans and weed the beans and pick the beans, and then you have to eat the beans. And you don't even like beans. It's classic Emerson and Thoreau. Things are in the saddle and ride men. If you don't need them, why have them? Yeah. You would hate computers. I'm sure you would despise them because they are so demanding of us. So demanding. Happened to me this week. That's right. Yeah. I was whipped by this Tuesday morning. I was telling Mary, I'm 9:30. I'm going from first period to second period, and the second period comes up. I am teaching a course, a college level course at Eastside in British Lit, credits through Seattle U, and they had never sent me a grade list for the first quarter. Well, wait till I get it. So between classes, she gives me at 9:30 a grade list for my British Lit class. She says, "This is due at 9 o'clock." I said, "You're crazy. I've got class right now in 2 minutes. I have to teach. I have 150 grades due tomorrow morning, yesterday, because our grades were due. And the grades are at home in my den." Well, these have to be done at 9 o'clock. I can't do it tomorrow. Well, 2 hours later at lunch, our principal, Dick Ellis, comes up while I'm introducing my new practice teacher, student teacher, to the school with a note. The grades have to be in today at 4:30, no later. I said, "Why?" He said, "The Seattle U computer insists that they be in." They had kept my grade sheet in the main office of the English department at Seattle U for 3 weeks because they thought that it was going to Bellarmine, and nobody took the time to find out where it was going. So Seattle U's computer had me by the throat yesterday. I had to go leave school early, to go home, to dig up the grades, and go up to Seattle U to get them there at 4 o'clock. I hate it. I told the man at the registrar's office, I said, I feel like the dog. The father comes home, he had a bad day at the office, he gets mad at the mother kicks the older son, he kicks the daughter kicks the dog. Right, so right down the line, it went from the English department to the registrar to the principal to the secretary to me. So I went home and kicked my wife, she kicked John, we kicked Emily, and our parakeet really got it that night, all the way down. But the truth is, it wasn't the computer, it was the thing. My immediate reaction was the computer can start tomorrow, but I didn't. Somebody. So things are in the saddle and ride mankind. There are 2 laws discrete, not reconciled. Discrete means noticeably separated. It doesn't mean discretion. It means unique, separate laws that are they don't come together. Law for man and law for thing. The last builds town, complete. But it runs wild. It doth the man unclean. The rules of society, in other words. You've got to build a building. Build the building. But human values crumble. There's a building over here by the farmer's market that is so ugly that when I look there, I want to look someplace else. And I know that building was built for a human being who wanted to make a lot of money, but he doesn't care at all about the rest of us who, every time we go into downtown Seattle, look at this wretched structure, which will be there for the next 50 years. That is, something else ruled that structure because nobody could look at that without feeling, ugh, when they see it. It's one of those new condominiums. You know what I'm talking about. 'Tis fit the forest fall, the steep be graded, the mountain tunneled. the sand shaded, the orchard planted, the glebe tilled, the prairie granted, the steamer built. Does he have any complaints about that? No, I mean, these things, we relate to the world too. These things should happen. Let man serve law for man. Live for friendship. Live for love. For truths and harmonies behoof. The state may follow how it can, as Olympus follows Jove. Yet do not I implore the wrinkled shopman to my sounding woods. I'm not screaming that the person who's living in the shop doing his business come out and live in the woods and listen to the water going through the woods. Nor bid the unwilling senator ask votes of thrushes in solitude. Everyone to his chosen work. Foolish hands may mix and mar. Wise and sure the issues are. Round they roll till dark is light, sex to sex, even to odd. The over-God who marries right to might, who peoples unpeopled. He who exterminates races by stronger races, black by white faces, knows to bring honey out of the lion, grafts gentle as scion on pirate and Turk. Emerson essentially believed, and we'll see this in a while when we get to experience, that even these unhappy things, he lists a variety of things. Why does one nation defeat another nation? Why did the whites do this to the blacks? He doesn't say these are right, but he does believe that there is a God that is, for whom it is possible to take the body of a lion and turn it into honey. It's the magic, someplace along the line. In other words, Emerson is not going to give in to despair because of the misery of what we do to each other. There's a strong. I think he would find it. He had never lived through. He lived through awful. I mean, slavery is as bad as you could get, you would think. But I don't think he conceived the possibility of something like concentration camps. But partly it's the fact that slavery is, as awful as it is, in its most awfulness, it's an abstract phenomenon. Most slaves were fed. They were property. They were taken care of because you take care of your car. So the terror of slavery is interior in many ways, in practical sense. I think Emerson was able to give himself a little distance because of that, in many ways. I don't know how he could do it, because we found new, visible ways of using fellow man. As awful as slavery
You
is.
also thought that your great grandparents, how old was the age of hope? They couldn't unless they graduated anyway. I mean, they were able to go back to their started in such an amazing place.
Yeah. Well, it's you're talking about the change since
Yes,
the.
the change. It's hard.
People have lived through it.
Yes.
I think I told you about my grandmother. Didn't I tell you about the time when the men were walking on the moon? My grandmother was born in 1878, so she was an adult in 1900, turn of the century, 22. Was teaching grade school at the time, an intelligent woman. But she didn't see her first car until she was nearly 30. So she was raised in the pre-20th century era, extremely. She died in 1970. She was a long life, in her 90s. 1969, we landed on the moon with her. And so I went. She was in an old folks home at the time. And I had the newspaper with me and said, man lands on the moon, in a picture of the flag. Remember that quote? And I held it up to Graham and I said, Graham, do you realize that there are people walking on the moon right now? And she said, don't tell me that. And I said, Graham, this is right, all of human society has worked to this point. We're up there right now. Don't tell me that. That's not funny, Gary. She liked me, but she saw me. For her, at 93 at the time, she was saying, "This is a joke," and she never liked practical jokes. It never did. And the best she could make of it was that this was a practical joke, and she wasn't. She was too old to have a practical joke. Well, I caught on after insisting for about 5 minutes that this was really going on, and put it away. And we talked about last Sunday's sermon, church, something like that. But for me, that's a classic situation. She just was too worn out to go one more step into the 20th century. At 93, she can't imagine that. It was not something in her realm of possibility. So we talk about change. Yeah, some things have happened that make it. I don't know if I'll reach the time where I will say, "Don't tell me that," but it's happened to most of us that we've had the emotion, haven't we? Even something like
I
that.
think you can get that feeling. My husband has to hear the news 10 times a day.
Yeah.
He has to watch it every night. And I'm such too. I need to know what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just too much. I mean, the great family of men, I can hardly tell.
With the little family, the Andersons are more than enough.
There's enough right there.
No, that's really true. My wife will do that. She will turn the TV off at supper time and say, "Yeah." But her point is, it's time for spaghetti. I can't take Cambodia right now. Later we will think about Cambodia. This Emerson is recognizes this. The Cossack eats Poland. See that thing? The Russian attacks Poland, and now this is a little skirmish. This literally happened in 1939. Right? I mean, the Russians and the Germans got an agreement together, and then Hitler took half, and Stalin came in and took the other half, like a ripe fruit. So this is a prediction. The Cossack eats Poland like stolen fruit. Her last noble is ruined. Her last poet, mute. Straight into double band, the victors divide. Right? As soon as they conquer, what happens to the two victors? They divide, and then it's Hitler against Stalin. This is a literal prediction of what happened. Half for freedom, strike and stand. The astonished muse finds solitude on her side. Emerson tended to believe that. It's an interesting. No, this is before Bismarck. This is 1848, 1849. And Bismarck is the 70s and 80s. So, yeah. The editors think that he's talking about a very minor political skirmish in Poland at that time, but it has to be long before. Curious phenomenon. So there Emerson is defending himself two different ways. It's 2 o'clock. You want your coffee, right? We'll come back and begin experience again at that time. Oh, they are. Oh, I see that.
I can't remember who it is. Is it Schofield or somebody?
Paul Schofield.
I'm not sure that
Richard
it's-
Kiley or
Is
something.
it Richard Kiley?
Richard, unlikely.
See, I didn't pay my $15, so I didn't get the prediction. So.
Until 9.
Okay. Yeah, keep an eye open for that if you want to get your Eliot in. Okay, let's, for the second hour, move into Emerson's essay Experience. Retrace our steps a little bit before I introduce. Last fall, in the 3 sessions, I was moving up rather gradually to this essay, which I think encapsulates nicely Emerson's frame of mind, the way he perceives things. It shows his balance, his slowness to come to absolute decisions about things. But I found myself trapped because it took me 2.5 sessions. I was well into the second hour of the 3rd session before I got going. And so I did experience in the latter Emerson in about 25 minutes. Yeah, it was not, though I thought the Emerson series was successful, I felt unfinished by it in terms of my plan. And the reason I was amiable to picking him up again was I thought this would be a chance for us to sit and look at it, experience more slowly. It's a neat essay, fun to read, though very difficult in many ways. It's a better essay to read as a group than by yourself in many ways. So we'll pick this up today, get as far as we can, finish it next week if necessary, and maybe step into 1 or 2 of the other late essays. So if you're bringing books next week, you might bring your Walden as well as your Emerson. I can't predict when we'll hit Walden. We'll go on to it afterwards. Let me begin with just a slight reprise from the end of Nature, the young man that Emerson was in his early years. It's that famous passage at the end of Nature where he speaks as pretty much like a minister to his audience and says, "You can build your own world." Famous statement. It's on page 56 in this edition if you look at it at the very end. Know then, the world exists for you. For you is the phenomenon perfect. What we are, that only can we see. All that Adam had, all that Caesar could, you have and can do. Adam called his house heaven and earth. Caesar called his house Rome. You perhaps call yours a cobbler's trade. 100 acres of plowed land, or a scholar's garret. Yet line for line and point for point, your dominion is as great as theirs. Page 56, did I misread that? Yeah, line for line and point for point, your dominion is as great as theirs, though without fine names. Build therefore your own world. Famous passage. He's saying, in essence, that you choose your own context. Adam had everything, heaven and earth. Caesar was strong enough to say, my world is Rome, I will rule it. If you define your world, he says, as an acre of plowed land, that's your world. If your acre is a garret, which is an attic, in which writers used to write in Grub Street in England, that's your world. It's a classic Emerson phrase. Emerson tended to see us as standing in a limited world of our own creation. And Emerson's essays will constantly ask us to say, you're frustrated, you're feeling unsatisfied, you haven't done enough, you haven't gone enough, you haven't perceived enough, break through. In the simplest of terms, something had to happen to Ronald Reagan to get him to see that he didn't have to be a third-rate actor all of his life. He could be a third-rate president. I mean, and all you have to do is get out there. That's a joke. But the point is, Emerson would very much appreciate that ability in Reagan to say, I'm not satisfied being the man I was in 1950. But it is a change in perception. So Emerson's point, my grandma would say, make lemonade out of your lemons, right? Go after that. As fast as you conform your life to the pure idea in your mind, that will unfold its great proportions. A correspondent revolution in things will attend the influx of the spirit. So fast will disagreeable appearances, swine, spiders, snakes, pests, madhouses, prisons, enemies vanish. They are temporary and shall be no more seen. The sordor and filth of nature, the sun shall dry up, and the wind fail. When I'm teaching this to students, I always say, think of what Emerson means. Most of us have something we find disgusting. And I can usually find half a dozen really disgusting things. Slugs, snakes. What makes you shiver with repulsion? Emerson says, a corpse rotting on the floor has its own beauty. And this is also good thinking, as you know. And Emerson's point is, if you look at a corpse and say, how disgusting, you are completely missing what that corpse is doing. The dissolution of the body of a person or an animal is its participation in nature. Emerson and Whitman would say, how much better to be put in the ground and come up as lilies and roses. Keep your matter going in life than to be solidified in concrete and put underneath a metal and cement bunker of some kind, and to end up like the pharaohs of Egypt, still intact after all these years. How depressing. It's what makes Whitman say, you want to find me? Look for me under your boot soles. I'm coming up in grass, and this is great. The point is, grass is life, and flowers are life, and you will be metamorphosed into life, and decay is part of that. It's a wonderful way of seeing it. Our bodies can never die. Our molecules will not die if we allow them to participate in God's will for nature, which is ever true. He gives you examples of these things. He says, snakes, spiders, pests, madhouses, prisons, all these, they're all awful things. See the world right, they will go away. Let's give him his credit. That's a powerful image. I can will myself not to be repelled by snakes, slugs. The fact is, I cannot will my grow reformatory to go away no matter how much I will. Emerson can only say this and only convince us of it in those momentary times in our life when we're willing to be innocent, gullible, imperceptive of what you and I all learned by being adults in the world for a while. There is a lot of unhappiness and misery and pain, and there are a lot of repelling features to life that willing them to go away will not convince us is true. Emerson could say it and believe it. And in some ways, I think it works. I would hope if I could convince myself that decay, which is a natural process, is not repulsive. And slugs have their own beauty. Well, I would. But when you move into the realities of human experience, I think you and I would agree that it's a lot harder to say that that a child murderer is vanishing because we will him not to be. Murder, abuse, terrible things in life. Only a very young man could say those things. And Emerson was not so narrow-minded as to commit himself at the age of 25 or 30 to a belief that would remain rigid through all experience. And he was going to get his tough experience, as you recall, last fall. So by the time he gets to the essay Fate, you see some of the change that he's undergone. Page 333. This essay is much later, 15 years later, I believe. He uses the same imagery halfway through. Will you say the disasters which threaten mankind are exceptional, and one need not lay his account for cataclysms every day? You say to me that the blowing up of Mount St. Helens is just so rare as to be an exception. You don't have to plan your life around the explosion of a volcano. I would not avoid going to Portland because of Mount St. Helens. Aye, he says. But what happens once may happen again. And so long as these strokes are not to be parried by us, they must be feared. You hear already the difference. He's saying you can't stop that mountain from going. As long as it can happen, you have to prepare for it. You can't live in a life where Mount St. Helens does not explode. It's likely to explode. But these shocks and ruins are less destructive to us. In other words, these natural tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes, are less destructive to us than the stealthy power of other laws which act on us daily. An expense of ends to means is fate. If you remember your Kant from college, Kant says, treat all human beings as though they are ends. The great sin in Kantian philosophy is treating other person as a means to an end. So, I want to get a car, I use you. Using a person as a tool. Emerson says Kant says the way you maintain your self-respect is to treat every human being as an end in himself, giving him the glory of being an end. Emerson says fate consistently turns ends into means. And that's one of the great sad facts of life. Organization, tyrannizing over character. The menagerie are forms and powers of the spine, of the fate. In other words, the menagerie, physical qualities. We are limited by what we are. You're 5'4", you're not going to become a Seattle Sonic, no matter how much you wish you were. And I have a little boy in my junior class who's about this big. He wants to become a Mariner. He's not going to become a Mariner. He can't throw that baseball fast enough. And so the counseling of this is what you must accept. You must accept that. You will not be unless you grow, you wait, you want. That's life. That's fate, in other words. The bill of the bird, the skull of the snake, determines tyrannically its limits. So is the scale of races, of temperaments, so is sex, so is climate. You're a woman, you're not going to become president of the United States. Right?
Don't be too
Yet. In his day it would be true. In us, yeah. So is the reaction of talent.
Gary, that's what you're going to say. I don't want to hear about that. That's not funny.
True, yeah. The vital power in certain directions. And then he gets this marvelous sentence, which is the opposite of the one I just read. Every spirit makes its house, but afterwards, the house confines the spirit. You know the difference? The young man is build your own house. You want to rule the world, you can. The older man says, the fact is, we build our own houses, yes. And after we build our house, we live in it. And we never go anyplace else. So there's the man, a shift in perception, reality coming up against idealism. Let's look at this major essay called Experience, page 254. Pick up where we started about 2:30 last October. Let's start with a look at some words on page 272. Put them on the board even so we can see them. These are the lords of life. Illusion, he says. Temperament. Temperament. Succession. Succession. Surface. Surprise. Reality. Subjectivity. These are the threads on the loom of time. These are the lords of life. Go back to the beginning. We'll do nature reading and talking here and hopefully make it interesting. The lords of life, the lords of life. I saw them pass in their own guise, like and unlike, courtly and grim, use and surprise, surface and pain. What is he talking about? He's talking about what rules us. What rules us in life? The way we perceive the world around us is a limitation of a particular angle of vision at any moment. And Emerson has noticed that as you go on through life, he chose these, and the essay is not organized in a neat fashion around these, but they're here. And he points out that what we do very largely as adults is excuse our independence, excuse our creative power. Power is the key word. Independence to do things by using one of these various ways to say, well, this is the way the world is. Everything is illusion. What's the use? I can't get at the truth anyway. Nothing is substantial. Oh, well, that's just the way he is. His temperament limits him. You can't do anything. You grow up to be that kind of person. In your genes, your mother was that way. Right? Oh, well, one thing comes after another. You know, why settle down with this? There'll be something else tomorrow. Succession. Oh, you can't get underneath anything anyway. All of life is just a surface. One surface after another. Well, you try to relax, settle down on something that's stable, will last. First thing you know, bang, you get hit from behind with a baseball bat, right? So since you can't count on anything, you're always being surprised at one thing after another. What's the use? Well, reality, the interior, that's the way it is out there, beyond particular, the real world, almost ideal reality. Oh, well, it's all one man's opinion. That's your opinion, this is my opinion. All of which, you see, are ways of seeing the world that take away from you your obligation to settle down, use your power, your creativity, and to attack the world around you. He sees these as negatives. They're lords. They limit us. And the essay is an exploration of these various traits. One reason I like it is that when I read that experience, I see myself in paragraph after paragraph. I almost use the same language, but I know I image the same thing. Look at it. Remember me saying this last fall. Where do we find ourselves? In a series of which we do not know the extremes and believe that it has none. We make and find ourselves on a stair. There are stairs below us, which we seem to have ascended. There are stairs above us, many a one which go upward and out of sight. But the genius, which according to the old belief stands at the door by which we enter, and gives us the leafy to drink that we may come to pale, lifts the cup of stone. And we cannot shake off the lethargy now. Day. Sleep lingers all our lifetime about our eyes. As night hovers all day in the boughs of the fir tree. All things swim and glitter. Our life is not so much fun. It's our perception. I love the opening image. You wake up in life. You cannot read that without thinking of another famous writer of this period. I'm sure you know the poem. soul that rises with us. Our life star had elsewhere, so far. Not in captiveness, not in utter nakedness, trailing clouds of glory. God who is on high. Wordsworth, as you know, from the Intimations Ode. The same point. We wake up not entirely remembering, but coming from some place. And Emerson says the problem is the genius. Genius here is a classic Greek word for God. And as we enter life, gives us this cup to drink. At least you know what Leafy does? Yes, but it came too strong. And instead of just having us forget where we came from, the dose stays in our system. So here we are at the age of 40, and we still say, where am I? Where am I going? Where have I been? It's a hangover, what it is, an exception. And the lovely image. You wake up in life, and there are these stairs. You know you come from someplace. You know you're going someplace. But you don't know where you've been. You don't know where you're going. So here's the challenge for any adult, especially. Where am I? Where am I on these stairs? It must be terrible to find yourself awake on a staircase in the IBM building and not know whether you're on the second floor or the 40th floor, right? But that's in a sense what we are in life. We don't know where the beginning is or the beginning. That sense of in-medias res situation going on. The danger is that we won't see things right then. Without any, I like it so much, there's no guide. What Emerson wants is what all of us want. Something substantial. If I put my feet down here and say, this is true. And you'll see as the essay goes on, he says, I could take grief. If that was it. I lost my son, and you know, the poem was written last fall. Remember that terrible poem about losing his child. I could take that if I could say, now I know. Even grief. But the point about the essay is that as soon as you grab it, he says the awfulness is this everlasting lubricity of things. Everything is greased. Everything is greased. You grab it and like a greased pig, it slips away. So all of life is just this trying to find some place to put your feet. Now I know the truth. Well, you know it, because tomorrow you're going to wake up and say, well, I was wrong yesterday. Now I know the truth. And you know very well you're going to feel different tomorrow. You're going to have a different way of seeing. Ghost-like, we glide through nature and should not know our place again. Find your way home. We move on. Did our birth fall in some fit of indigence? Indigence is poverty, right? And I think I'm getting, this is too much of high school business. I do this all the time when I'm reading these kids. I stop at a word and I say, you know that word? So I think I don't have to do that here, but it's old habits. Did our birth fall in some fit of indigence and frugality in nature, that she was so sparing of her fire, and so liberal of her earth, that it appears to us that we lack the affirmative principle. And though we have health and reason, yet we have no superfluity of spirit and inclination. Why were we created that way, that we're given healthy bodies and intelligence, but we lack that ability to get out of ourselves and the superfluity of spirit? That's nice. We have enough to live and bring the year about, but not an ounce to impart or to invest. Emerson's greatness as an essayist is very much to do with his ability to take an abstract idea such as this and link it to something you and I all have experienced in everyday life. That's my salary. Right? I can make it through the month if I'm lucky, but I can't put $5 in a savings bank. He says that's what we're given in terms of spirit and invention. Somehow nature gives us enough to make it from day to day. But you think you're going to get anything into stocks, you're crazy, kid. You're not going to. So not an ounce to invest. Nothing for interest. We are like, that our genius. We're a little more of a genius. I like that too. We are like millers on the lower levels of a stream when the factories above them have exhausted the water. We too fancy that the upper people must have raised their demand. That normal language. You ever feel that? Just enough. Just enough. I remember telling my roommate in college, we were talking about intelligence, and I still feel it about myself. That my grievance about my own intelligence is that God made me smart enough to know that I wasn't quite smart enough. If I was a little dumber, I'd be happier. I'm in charge of graduation, and the principal says, well, I want you to write a poem to put in the announcements for graduation. I said, sick, I can't write a poem. I can write a prose and an essay. But I don't have the creative spirit. I write poetry that looks like trash, so I didn't do it. I wrote a prose essay. He wrote a poem, and it's trash. But it's not got my name on it, see. So I know enough not to write the poem, and he doesn't. So did I say that right? Don't send Dick that tape. No. I should have never have said that with a tape going. I did. I gave it to him. If any of us knew what we were doing or where we are going, then when we think we best know. It's a peculiar sentence, isn't it? Syntax. But if any of us knew what we were doing or where we are going, then when we think we best know. In other words, the time in your life when you know exactly where you are. Right? I'm in charge. And if you won't. Think about it. I do it myself all the time. That day you've got the degree in hand, you know where you're going, you're heading up for a job, and they've just thrown your file in the wastebasket. And we never know. Even at the very moment when we're most in control in our lives, we don't know. We do not know today whether we are busy or idle. In times when we thought ourselves indolent, we have afterwards discovered that much was accomplished, much was begun in us. All our days are so unprofitable while they pass, that 'tis wonderful where or when we ever got anything of this which we call wisdom, poetry, virtue. We never got it on any dated calendar day. Some heavenly days must have been intercalated somewhere, stuck in the calendar, like those that Hermes won with dice of the moon. Little Cirrus might be on. This is just about my favorite passage in Emerson's prose, because it's something I've found to be very true in my life. We don't know. Now we are dealing in a world of illusion. We don't even have the judgment to know which are our most important days in our own lives. We think we know. We plan important days. But anybody in experience will know that the really great days are days you weren't ready for. The days you remember from your childhood. The ones that gave you an image of your father's love for you. Were days that he didn't even know, didn't even stop, right? The day he said, let's go to the fair. And he grabs his daughter and he goes off and he puts you on the Ferris wheel, and you have in your 5-year-old head an image of a dad who will say, come on, right, let's go. And you say, no. Something as simple as that, he wouldn't remember a week later, but he did. But you can be sure that that day was slipped into the calendar. Emerson says all those things, they happened between March 22nd and March 23rd. Think of it in your own life. How many times your life has changed? My life has changed. I taught a summer school class. Guy came in and sat there all summer in shorts in front of me 2 years ago, and I said almost no words to me. Final exam day came up. I was grading papers. He called me on the telephone. I'm Jim Walters. Yes, I said, I remember that. You want your final grade, don't you? I'm reading exams right now. I'm not done with it. He says, no. He says, I'm principal at Eastside Catholic in the English department. I'm the chairman of the English department. I wonder if you'd ever think of teaching in a private high school. I says, why not? The next Monday I was teaching. If I'd known that that guy was sitting in front of me, interviewing me for 8 weeks, I would have died with nervousness. So I figured now there's nothing I could do. He's seen me do everything, including take my shirt off and put on an Emily Dickinson T-shirt in present. So that's about it. But you see the point he's making? You plan a wedding date. And you count down from a year and a half ahead, 542 days, 541 days. Emerson's point is a wedding date, that is nothing but the end of a long series. The important day was the day you first saw her standing by her locker in 8th grade. Right? That was where, and you didn't even know it, that first sight of that first person who was going to become your wife got in your head, and it doomed you for the rest of your life. The wedding date's all after the effect. Same thing. It's all after it's all over. It's just a formal statement of what's already going on in your head for years. Intercalated. So it's stuck in. We don't know, in other words, when we're having an important. It could be today.
The other night there was a woman who was arguing with Rubenstein and he played a lot. They asked him to think about his life, and he said, a good life just can't be happy all the time. If you live a good life with his courage throughout life, sometimes you have a happy
he did take that, everybody knew Rubenstein apparently says that the man had this incredible gusto for life, doing things, getting off it. He couldn't be a great pianist without it.
And that he was 90 years old.
Yeah.
And
He was 96 when he died.
in raising a child, that's what the goal is, not to discourage.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Give him that sense of strength. It's a very Emersonian. Very. You can think of this yourself. Most of you remember your parents. My mother died when I was 12, and I have this pre-personhood for children. And my images of her, I can see her bending over the stove, and I come in at the third grade, and I come in, I can smell the bread. And she's got the oven open, and she's pouring out the bread. So every time I smell homemade bread, I think of my mom. I can think of her behind the couch with a vacuum cleaner too. But it's just a number of discrete images, none of which had any importance to her at all. I think our parents, almost invariably, this is true of parents and children. As the parent goes about his life, and the kids are radically influenced by your willingness to put your book down and say, "Hey, kid, great kid," despite their feeling of importance. Isn't this true for all of us? It's not the big ones. It is said that all martyrdoms looked mean when they were suffering. We think of all the saints, and we imagine that when the saints go, the angels are there with trumpets, and the earth is shaking. Emerson says no. When the saints were martyred, they looked awful. They died in misery. Christ died in misery too. He didn't die with angels and died in great big organs from some cathedral signaling the change. No, they looked terrible. But important things were happening. The surest truth of life in history is that if you saw Christ, you would walk right by him. And look at the effect that man had. And even Hitler, the paltry little jerk, isn't he? If you look at him, you can imagine the power that man had. All martyrdoms looked mean when they were suffered. Notice Emerson's flip. Image. He doesn't even relate them. Just move on to the next one. Every ship is a romantic object except the one we're sailing in. So I remember this last fall, I said, you're sitting in the Queen Mary, you're crossing the Atlantic, and here goes the Queen Elizabeth, and you say, oh boy, I'd be having a good time if I was on that ship. Right? I remember telling you, did I tell you about coming down the Rhine? We were going down the Rhine, I got a slide of it. Going down the Rhine on one of the Rhine steamers, and we were standing at the railing of the boat, and so I was taking snapshots of the castles, and I took the snapshot of a hotel on the Rhine. And it's the Bellevue Hotel. Funniest thing. There I am every day. I didn't know that. This is 12 years ago. But I've got a slide of me taking a picture of this beautiful tourist hotel on the Rhine. And on the slide are people in the tourist hotel porches, and they're taking pictures of the boat that I'm in going down the Rhine. And here we are. I'm thinking, wow, I'd love to stop and sit in that hotel for a week and just look at the river and look at the castles. And they're sitting and they're saying, wouldn't it be nice to be on that boat? We're going down the Rhine. Every ship is a romantic object except the one we sail in. Embark, and the romance quits our vessel and hangs on every other sail on the horizon. This is illusion, see. Our life looks trivial. We shun to record it. Men seem to have learned of the horizon, the art of perpetual retreating. The horizon always goes back. Now this makes me feel bad. I have kept a diary since 1961, and I quit it about 2 months ago. I decided my life is so petty, it's not worth the effort of the journal. And there I did exactly what he said. Nothing's happening. I'm too busy at work doing petty details, and I don't have anything interesting to say, so it's 22 years, and I quit. We better go back to it, I guess. Yonder uplands are rich pasturage, and my neighbor has fertile meadow. But my field, says the querulous farmer, only holds the world together. Yeah. I quote another man saying, unluckily, that other withdraws himself in the same way. He quotes me. Have you heard what Emerson said? And Emerson saying, well, is this all true? The other person always has a better situation, better insight. 'Tis the trick of nature thus to degrade today. A good deal of buzz, and somewhere a result magically slipped in. Every roof is agreeable to the eye. So it is lifted. Look into the mansion, you won't see perfection there after all. They're going to be ordinary people having ordinary troubles. Then we find tragedy and moaning women and hard-eyed husbands and deluges of leasing. And the men ask, "What's the news?" As if the old were so bad. Do rich people go home into their mansions and is Reagan to that? "What's the news, Nancy?" It's all just the same ordinary material. How many individuals can we count in society? How many actions? How many opinions? About 2, maybe 3. Everybody's like everybody else. Same opinions. So much of our time is preparation. So much is routine, and so much retrospect. That the pith of each man's genius contracts itself to a very few hours. The history of literature is a sum of very few ideas, very few original tales, all the rest being variation of these. So in this great society, wide lying around us, a critical analysis would find very few spontaneous actions. It is almost all custom. There are even very few opinions. These seem organic in the speakers. Do not disturb the universal necessity. That's sad, but it's also very true, isn't it? And this is one of the ways everything is demeaned, made ordinary, that we are involved with. Everything that's nice is over there on the other side. Our house is the only one that has an argument. All our neighbors are happy. Until the husband and wife split, right? And we see that happening all the time around us. So he gets to this interesting point. We're dealing with getting at, grasping through illusion. Their glory, not mine. And he says, what about our own experiences? What opium is instilled in all disaster? You want to talk about getting at, do you think, if love is evanescent, at least tragedy comes and it's hard, it stays. It shows formidable as we approach it. Bankruptcy, death of a lover, husband, child. But there is at last no rough, grasping friction. The most slippery, sliding surface. He says tragedy, bad things. They seem to come with so much impact. To have so much friction here just means this. So that you can grab it hard, it won't slide away if you have any tires in the road. We fall soft on a thought. Ate Dei is gentle. Over men's heads walking aloft with tender feet, treading so soft. People grieve and bemoan themselves, but it is not half so bad with them as they say. There are moods in which we court suffering, in the hope that here at least we shall find reality, sharp peaks and edges of truth. I've known students like this, you in particular. It seems to be young people are coming. They do this. They get into relationships, they call it, really love affairs with a boyfriend, and they heighten them up and they split up. Because of they seem to want the intensity of a big fight and then a reconciliation, and so much more fun to be back together again after you had this big fight. And the sense of if you have a high or a deep emotional experience with somebody, it's something you can grab onto. He says it turns out to be scene painting and complicated. The only thing grief has taught me is how shallow. Why can't we stay in grief when you come to grief? That, like all the rest, plays about the surface. Come back to this later on. And never introduces me into the reality or contact with which we would even pay the costly price of sin. If I could come to terms with reality, I would be willing to lose my son. If the grief that I felt was a grief that had that friction that would enable me to grab onto it and say, now I know what it is. He is more sad about losing his grief than he is about losing Waldo, the boy. Because the loss of the grief implies that the love was not as great as he thought it was. How can I go about life, a normal life, and not feel bad when I've lost my son? I thought it would last forever. Here is turning around at this. Was it Boscovich who found out that bodies never come in contact? This is 19th century stuff. Scientists who speculated that even when you put your hand out to somebody and shook hands, there is a radiation separating you so that two flesh never can really touch, that aura type thing. So you feel somebody, but you don't really feel their flesh. You feel this barrier between you. Well, souls never touch their objects. And innavigable sea washes with silent waves between us and the things we aim at and converse with. Grief, too, will make us idealists. Idealists here is philosophical. In the death of my son, now more than 2 years ago, I seem to have lost a beautiful estate. No more. I cannot get it nearer to me. If tomorrow I should be informed of the bankruptcy of my principal debtors, the loss of my property would be a great inconvenience to me, perhaps for many years, but it would leave me as it found me, neither better nor worse. So it is with this calamity. It does not touch me. Something which I fancied was a part of me, which could not be torn away without tearing me, nor enlarged without enriching me, falls off from me and leaves no scar. It was caducus. I grieve that grief can teach me nothing, nor carry me one step into real nature. One reason Emerson is so much interesting to read, very, is that it does things we do not expect. Most of us would take just the opposite point of view. One of the consolations of loss is that it's bearable as time passes, isn't it? 6 months is what I've read psychologists say. If you lose somebody you love dearly, you will grieve intensely for 6 months and gradually adjust to it. We call it facing reality, don't we? You have to go on. Life continues. You can't go through life feeling great about tragedy. Emerson says that's exactly the phenomenon which is awful about life. Because how could I say I could lose my son? And 2 years later, it's as though I lost a nice piece of artwork. Right? As though somebody stole a painting from me. Or my house had gone on the block when I didn't want it to. He finds it very depressing that even the most intense of all experiences becomes very, very manageable. Go on. Because Emerson, like most of us, would like to say, I've touched it. I've hit the interior. And he says, even grief. It is. But he would rather not survive.
You can't breathe into this.
No, but he says that's what I want. Yes. Well, he would say, philosophically, that's what I want. I don't think he wants to say that he wants to be in great grief all the time. He doesn't, not as a man who's living his life. But this is a philosophical statement, more than an emotional one. Because philosophically, what he says is, I want reality. I want to touch it, hold it, and feel it. And the closest we get it in terms of our feelings is when we have something like tragedy. We can say, now I know what it is. Right? I remember sitting on the toilet after I saw my mother's body and crying for 2 hours. I wouldn't even go out the door because I felt so awful. I couldn't move. Right? Just like that. She was 37 years old. Bam, dead, 2 days. And I went down to the basement of the toilet and I sat there and, well, here I am. I haven't cried about her for 25 years. What's wrong with me? Emerson would say, it's only at that time that you feel you're really hitting it. Now you and I know this is life. Right? Life is things going on. You don't quit. You can't predict some of these things, but it happens to us, your parents, your children, your mothers, right? Brothers and sisters. Okay. But philosophically, you see Emerson's point? The closest you can get is that sense of now I know what that emotional experience is. And then off it goes. So if I talk about grief to you now, all I can do is give you a recollected, very controlled remembrance of the times that I've grieved. I'm not in grief right now. I feel reasonably good. Do you have to be under great stress and grief to know what grief is? But recollection is not it, is it? Just as remembering what elation is not elation. All emotions are the same way. Part of what Emerson says is frustrating about life is that all of the intensest emotions go like that. You just become, I would love to be elated all my life, and it goes away. He says, I would, if I could have it, I would even opt for being in grief all my life. Because then I would have something to say, no, I've got to do that. So he says, what seems to be paradoxical, I grieve that grief can teach me nothing, nor carry me one step into real nature. I'm curious of it. The Indian who was laid under a curse that the wind should not blow on him, nor water flow to him, nor fire burn him, is a type of us all. There's a Indian myth. How would you like to be the Indian who's never touched? Fire won't burn you, water won't make you warm, cold and damp, the wind won't chill you. It would be terrible. I mean, we want our senses, don't we? We want them to be open to the world around us. That is just typical of what we all go through in terms of experiences. The dearest events are summer rain, and we, the paracoats that shed every drop. The things that are most wonderful to us are like a mild summer rain. And what are we doing? We're all buttoned up to here, our southwester on, and they go off us, and we're kept perfectly dry. Nothing is left us now but death. We'll have to experience that. He suspects, I suspect, that even that will go by pretty casually, and we won't have much there. We look to that with a grim satisfaction, saying, there at least is reality that will not dodge us. I take this evanescence and lubricity of all objects. Where those evanescence means vanishing, like a cloud. It vaporizes. And lubricity is lubrication, yes. That's the way. It lets them slip through our fingers, then when we clutch the hardest, to be the most unhandsome part of our condition. I like the understatement of that, unhandsome. Do you know the poem by, I hardly dare say this because Emerson despised the man, called Romance? The poem where Poe says, is all we see a dream within a dream? And he gives the example of reaching down and picking up a handful of sand. It's really a neat line. He says, I hold it in my hand, and the harder you grasp it, right? He says that's what is very much into what Emerson is saying here. You can't hold a handful of sand with any solidity. The harder you grasp it, the more you lose. And it drives Poe up the wall. You can't stand it. Because what Emerson is that lubricity. Right, give me a, put my hands on it, feel it. It's not there. He says it's the most unhandsome part of our condition. I like that unhandsome part phrase. Nature does not like to be observed, and likes that we should be her fools and playmates. We may have a sphere for our cricket ball, but not a berry for our thorn. You want to play cricket? Okay, nature will give you the whole earth. But if you want to understand what truth is, nature won't even give you a blackberry to make it fit. Direct strokes she never gave us power to make. All our blows glance, all our hits are accidents, sporting language. Our relations to each other are oblique and casual. Opening section ends. In other words, you can't get at it. Elusiveness everywhere. My watch says 3 o'clock on the button now, and we're at a scraping. Are you enjoying this way of looking at everything?
Oh, yes.
Would you like to continue on with experience next week?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do that. And we'll see some of the other Lords of Life then next week. Finish the essay. Have you noticed, by the way, that Emerson reads much better aloud than he does in your own ears? Amazing. Okay, see you next week.
Very good.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I enjoyed it so much.
Good to see you.